Are you also one of those people who constantly have countless thoughts running through your head, and many of them are more negative than positive? Today, I want to show you how our mind works from a psychological point of view, because I know that the more we understand our inner world, the easier it becomes to change and transform what is causing us pain. And above all, I want you to better understand these inner parts within us, the ones that we like and mostly the ones that we hate. More and more people are talking about things like working with inner parts, healing the inner child, and doing shadow work, and so on. And it's very important to understand what is going on inside of us, because only then can we stop thinking that something is really wrong with us and that we are not normal. And it also helps us to stop becoming so obsessed with our thoughts and start to see the world beyond them. This also helps us better to understand why things happen the way they are, and especially why it happens in other people. And on top of that, you will also understand better how trauma works and how much it actually affects you. We have been taught to see ourselves as just one singular person, and almost forced to define ourselves only by our positive traits. That's how we present ourselves to others, by our name and what we do. But maybe you can already see that we are people with many different sides and tastes, moods, feelings, desires, and needs, and so many other things. In other words, we are not just one thing, but several parts that coexist within us. And that is what makes you who you are, and also someone different from someone else. What makes our mind spiral into negativity and feel like we cannot even make a decision, or feel this inner conflicts without knowing what to do, and even do something that we don't feel like it, it's the fact that there are parts inside of us that believe in different things and also in opposite things from each other. But how is that possible? How can we have two contradictory truths inside of us? That's what I'm going to explain with examples, how these parts are formed and why so often we are able to pretend, hide what we feel, and stop being honest with ourselves and with others. When I use the word trauma, most of the people associate that with something very extreme, like rape, abuse, or similar extreme situations. But in reality, trauma is also something so simple as living through a negative experience that created pain, for which we, in that moment, the person cannot find a resolution. It's like there is no way out or to resolve it. In other words, they don't know how to deal with that, and what are they feeling, or how to release those emotions in a more healthy way. And yes, all of our traumas have begun when we were children, because when we are babies, we experience everything for the first time. And there is not a single human being walking on earth who does not have different kinds of trauma. We all have them. The only question is how severe those experiences were for us. And this is where fragmentation begins. In other words, the division into inner parts. So let's start with a few examples to understand that trauma is actually more simpler and common than we actually think. And many experiences that seem to be so normal in our childhood continue in truth to affect us deeply in our adult life, as well as in our everyday lives. So I'm going to start with an example that happened to me when I was a little kid, around 2, 3, 4 years old. At that time, my mother and my father decided to separate. And my father pulled away from me in a very quick and abruptly way. So naturally, I felt that distance, and of course, it was really not a good feeling. So here I was faced with a very painful and confusing emotion because I didn't understand anything about what was happening or what was I feeling. And at that age, I couldn't understand why that person no longer wanted to be with me. And since my mother also couldn't help me or support me through that transition, I felt powerless, I felt terrified and abandoned. And because no one could help me, my ego, so my rational side, he tried to find a way to survive the moment and escape that hell. In other words, it developed a way to run away from the pain. So the first thing that I noticed was that this vulnerable part of me, the one that cried and felt all the pain, wasn't helping me at all. It was just maintaining me in that pain. So it was only making me suffer more and more. So my rational side turned against that part and was like, okay, this has to disappear. And because of that, I started to see that part of me as an enemy. Something that only made me feel bad and uncomfortable. And that is how I created another personality. The one that was more independent, that suddenly doesn't need any father's attention and care. In other words, a new way of being was born, created to help me get out of this pain. Normally, it's the parents who should teach us what emotions are, what they represent, how to process them, and deal with them in a healthy way. But since my parents didn't know that, my grandparents also didn't know that, nobody teach them either, they themselves were not able to help me. So because of that, my mother couldn't help me at that moment. And in a way, she also abandoned me. So now, which of those parts actually make me feel safer? The vulnerable one that cries and is in need of a father? Or the independent one that forgets about it and doesn't need it anymore? The answer here is clear. So I ended up showing to the outside world, so to the other people, that I was more independent and that I didn't need a father, while at the same time completely suppressing and denying the part of me that actually was vulnerable and missing him. The more you hate a certain part of your personality or of someone else's personality, the further away it actually is from you. So this means that you had to see that as something very bad, negative, and you were kind of forced to distance yourself from it. This is what we call as a defense mechanism because it defends us from something. But now, if I present myself to others as Mr. Independent, does that mean that that's who I really am? No. And it does not matter how much I try to lie to myself, convince to myself that yes, this is me, this separation, this vulnerable part of me, it will not disappear. It's still there because it's not resolved. So that means it stays there, but it's hidden. And for me, this event was so painful that I ended up completely forgetting that the moments and memories that I lived with my father. Only when I decided to heal and look within myself, only then did that memory rise to the surface and I was able to remember exactly how everything felt for me, and as well as some of the memories, moments that I had lived with him. So this here already shows us how powerful our ego, our defense mechanisms are, to the point that they can make us forget about certain events, very dramatic events. But be careful, just because you forgot something does never mean that you stopped feeling them. You can feel it, but you cannot associate it with the memory anymore. So another example, imagine someone who as a child really loved painting. It's not my example, it's just an example. but whose parents believe that the only way to support themselves and to be successful in life is to go to the university and become maybe a doctor, engineer, teacher, or something that we call as having a normal job. And on top of that, every time that the child wanted to paint and do something creative, instead of doing schoolwork, they would criticize the kid. So here, in order to be accepted by the family, that child is forced to separate them from this creative part, this side that they have, and see them even as an enemy or as something that will not bring them anything good. And that makes the child then focus more on the school and normal things. So in this way, the child created a new personality that maybe was a more disciplined one, or it all depends, for everybody is different. So it created a personality that allowed the kid to meet their parents' expectations. And in fact, there are a lot of people who are taking a degree, but they don't even really know why. They are just doing it because they kind of have to have a degree and the school done, but they don't like it. People that do that, they carry this type of separation in them. They were not able as a kid to develop or follow what they truly loved from an early age, and they were forced to disconnect from that part of themselves. And so instead, they created a personality that actually allowed them to study something that they not truly like. But here it's important to understand that all of this fragmentation happens unconsciously. This is not something that you can easily control or even notice. It's almost automatic, especially when we are children. So another example, when I was little, I wore a lot of dresses and I like expressing my feminine side a lot. But it was especially at the beginning of my adolescence and during the adolescence that I started receiving a lot of unwanted attention, especially from older people. And I was even touched in inappropriate ways. And that created a lot of fear in me and made me feel extremely insecure and vulnerable. So my ego, my rational side, in order to protect me, created a personality in which I began hiding my body more and more and my feminine side. And here I even started to hate dresses and all those feminine things, and I even began dressing more like a boy. I really tried to act like them, just so that other people wouldn't come close to me. So in other words, I started seeing my feminine side as something very dangerous and bad, and I began to hate it. And with that strategy, I noticed that I stopped receiving this unwanted attention, and people were actually leaving me alone. So deep down, I really felt like I had to turn into a tomboy to protect myself. Now, another very common example, which most people do not see as trauma, is this. Do you recognize the phrase, eat everything on your plate, otherwise you cannot leave this table? Your body knows exactly how much food you actually need and want. But if you pay attention, especially when we are children, it is often our parents and even in the school or our family who decide how much we should eat. So in other words, if you tell your parents that you are no longer hungry because your body is telling you that you are full, but they reject that signal, you enter in a conflict between what you truly feel and what your parents expect from you. And of course, as children, we always choose what our caregivers expect from us because we know that we depend on them. So that means you had to force yourself to eat more until the plate was empty, And then we deal with the consequence of feeling heavy and uncomfortable. And by the time that you reach adulthood, you might end up not being able to respect or even hear your body anymore. You don't even understand anymore what this heaviness, that what you are feeling, where it comes from. If it is from eating too much, or because you ate this specific thing, or because of the stress, you cannot connect the dots. So in other words, the signals that your body gives you stop being clear to you. So this makes you not understand why. And this is not healthy at all. Another very common example is when people, let's say that they made fun of you every time that you were expressing anger or crying. Something that actually happens quite a lot with boys. So as a child, when you realize that if you cry in front of others, the response you get is teasing, mockery, or something else, then you enter into a conflict with what you feel. So one part of you needs to express itself. That's why you are angry or you cry. But because you see that as being denied and rejected, your ego, so your rational mind, steps in and creates a defense mechanism, which some people call it as be strong, or maybe you even become the funny one. So that means that this mechanism made you reject that part of yourself so much that you stop crying in front of everyone, not just one specific person. So that means that this mechanism made you reject that part of yourself so much that you can actually come to a point to not even cry, not only in front of others, not cry at all. But that is extremely toxic, because the less you release, the heavier your energy becomes, and the more pain you are carrying it for years and years. This is what suffering is. So as you can see, those experiences that we consider harmless or unimportant, in reality created traumas that affects us a lot in our adolescence and adulthood. All children are deeply dependent on the approval of their parents, the family, and the community. Emotional neglect can have such serious consequences and leave deep marks throughout our life. There are so many examples of people that fall into depression because of it, or develop self-destructive behaviors, or even destructive behaviors against others, when after they experience a rejection or an abandonment or betrayal. We know so many crazy histories about betrayal, and this suffer is connected to these emotional wounds and this inner fragmentation. And another thing, because approval is so important to us as children, our parents, they always teach us what is right and what is wrong depending on their beliefs. And this over time creates a part inside of us that works like inner police officer. This emotion, this inner police, is called shame. And this is one of the most dominant parts inside of ourselves. I even have a video that only talks about this emotion. And this part is easily to identify. Do you know those phrases and criticism that your parents constantly repeated? Things like, oh, you're so stupid. Aren't you ashamed of what you're doing? Oh, look at this. What an ugly boy. You cannot even do this. Things like that, which now as an adult, you end up saying that yourself in exactly the same way, the same phrases and all that. And you catch yourself repeating them, especially when something is wrong or when you feel like you failed. So this is the voice of those who took care of you and you socialize the most. These voices, you internalize them and adopt them as a way to keep you in line. And it's what is making you able to continue to do what others taught you, what you should do and how you should do it. But this is also exactly the thing that stops you from being more authentic, from discovering who you really are, and from finding your passions as well as following them. The bigger the hatred and denial that you have from these inner parts inside of you, the greater the tension is. And this tension is what we call suffering. So you can imagine this tension as being like an elastic band. The more you pull, the more tension it creates. But here, something important that we also need to understand is that our ego, our rational mind, creates all these inner critical voices and those negative voices that push us down. He created that with the purpose of actually protecting us from the outside world. This means that when you were younger and that was developed the first time, it helped you a lot. The only problem is that now actually that's so toxic that is what is completely limiting you. So when you hear people saying that you should heal the inner child inside of you, give it attention and do parts work or shadow work, what they really mean is that you need to look at these parts of yourself that you were forced to reject, to deny, to see them as an enemy, and start giving them attention again. This also means offering them the care and everything else that at the time when it happened, you could not give or receive to yourself, because no one knew how to help you and how to give that, not even yourself. So now as an adult, you are the one who needs to give that to yourself in order to release that tension and that pain. The meaning of self-love is being able to look at those parts inside of you without judgment, allowing them to express themselves and to make peace with them, integrate them again. To love is to accept someone as part of us. So this means being able to see them, hear them, understand them, and value them without forcing them to change and becoming this thing. And this means to love yourself or others is the same. So it is when you are able to heal those parts, to look at them, that you are able to react in a completely different way in the outside world. And especially the way that your relationships are, they will change, they will be different. So you stop being able to hate certain attitudes in the same way, because you begin to better understand the reason beyond other people's criticism and behavior, because you also already understood it within yourself. And if something unexpected and negative happens, you will deal with that in a different way, and you will look at it with different eyes, because now you already know how to deal with it on an emotional level. So that means you are going to be able to, when something happens, instead of panicking, trying to run away or pretending that it didn't happen, you are going to be able to actually feel it, release it, and then it's not stuck in you anymore. Just comes in and out. Yes, it hurts, but at least it came in and out. It doesn't stay there for years and years. So if you truly want to be more authentic, to get to know yourself and live a life that actually fits you, a life that makes you feel good and free, you will have to look within. You have to understand those inner voices, your thoughts, and through that, learn to distinguish what does not belong to you or what does not even came from you, and what actually is you and makes you feel good. But this is a process that requires time and patience. So I hope that helped you in some way, and as always, I wish you a very nice week.